Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Michiko Walcott. I am the principal consultant at Insight Analytics. Before we start, if somebody could just type a quick hello on the chat box to make sure that you can actually hear me, that will be wonderful. Perfect, thank you. Again, my name is Michiko Walcott. I am the principal consultant at Insight Analytics. A little bit about me. I work with organizations of various types and sizes around the world on data and analytics, but not on the technical aspect. So more things like strategy, management, org structure, processes, capabilities, soft skills, and even culture that are related to data and analytics. So pretty much everything outside of actually doing analytics. I do have a technical background, just to make that clear. But I wanted to clarify this before we start, because the types of the things that I do, and therefore what I'm going to address today, is a little bit different from what a lot of people might think of when it comes to data and analytics. So anyways, we're all kind of stuck inside with the whole COVID-19 stuff going on, and so I thought I'd do a series of 30-minute, relatively informal kind of Q&A sessions on various non-technical topics about data and analytics, basically until I can't for one reason or another. I was actually planning on doing this in some form, but the whole COVID-19 situation kind of accelerated that process, if you would. And anyways, today's session is the first of the series with the topic Enterprise Processes to Generate Value from Analytics and Innovation. So I'm intending this to be for technical leaders of analytics, statistics, data science, current and future leaders, not just current leaders, but current and future leaders. Before we get too far, I use the term analytics, statistics, data science, all kind of interchangeably in this session. And in fact, I'll pretty much stick to analytics for the most of the time, just to simplify things. But just know that this is all applicable regardless of which one you consider yourself to be, whether you consider to be an analytics professional, a statistician, a data scientist. It's all pretty much interchangeable for the purpose of this session. Bit of housekeeping. If it lets me advance the slide. Come on. Okay, that's cute. Yeah, there we go. The session will be 30 minutes. Please do keep the video off for various reasons, one of which is that it makes it a little bit simpler and less unruly. You are all muted, and you won't be able to unmute yourself. This is not because I'm a control freak, but it's really more just to make it easier for me to run a one-person show. Today I'm flying solo, so and also a little bit by the seat of my pants here, so please bear with me, like that little technical weirdness that I just happened. And if you have any questions you'd like for me to address, and please enter in the chat box, and they'll come directly to me, and I will do my best to address them in the time we have. Because of the short time, I will only address questions that are really directly related to the topic at hand, and we will revisit the remaining questions later in other sessions or somewhere else. The session is being recorded. Since I'm alone at the controls, hopefully I'm hoping that this works. If it works, you'll get a link to the recording, and if as well as all people who registered. So in the last little bit, today's session is directed primarily at a US-based audience, but really only from the language perspective. The topic is universal, And I can say from experience that these problems really know no geopolitical boundaries. I see the same problems in every market where I've been in. And at the really fundamental level, we're pretty much all the same. The problems are pretty universal. So anyways, with that said, I'm going to motivate the session by referring to something I've heard very recently on a webinar. That we will need to show our business value or we'll get cut just like anybody else with all the stuff, the economic crisis that are happening from COVID-19. So and not only that, I'm starting to kind of hear from various sources, and some of you probably have as well, that analytics professionals are not immune to furloughs, headcount reductions, and hiring freezes. Now, if you're in the health field, you're probably in much better luck than everybody else. But outside of survival is likely fair game today. So, so that's on one side. On the other side is that we also hear time and time again, actually quite repeatedly, um, from any number of think tanks and business research firms that anywhere from 60–70% of analytics efforts do not meet expectations. Now, the businesses aren't going to keep us employed much longer if they do not see clear value from what we do. And we can keep on saying that analytics is important and the scientific process is important, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, when something does not produce value, it becomes a pure expense, right? And expenses get cut in tough times. That's just the reality of things. And this is the same whether your clients are internal to your organization or external to your organization, if you belong to an organization at all. So, and I don't mean to start off with somewhat of a bleak message here, but it is the reality that we might be facing right now. And it's more than timely now to focus on the value that we bring as analytics professionals, hence the motivation. So let me address that. One of the questions submitted was, well, how do you show the value of your analytics to your clients? It was slightly more specific, but I'm sort of paraphrasing it here a little bit. So the first reaction I'd have to that is that, well, first, if you're having to prove the value of analytics and are struggling, today's topic will hopefully give you some things to think about. It goes a little bit more than I think what more further than what we are perhaps used to. But anyways, the bottom line is that we as a profession, right, and especially right now, really need to focus on the value to the business or to your client. So those values could be monetary or financial in the sense that we understand revenue and cost. They could be non-monetary in the sense that things like regulatory, reputational, cultural, even fame, et cetera. But these are eventually monetary or financial anyways, only indirectly so. Sometimes our challenge is that a lot of times we get really caught up with things like model performance metrics and p-values, but we have to really understand and kind of keep in mind that that doesn't really address the value of the analytics to the business or to your client. It's something that we use to measure what we do, or measure the performance, or measures something that we produce, but that's not the end, right? That's just a means to an end and not the end itself. So we have to think much further out than that. And again, because in a cost-cutting environment, you're not going to survive expense reduction by explaining model performance metrics to an executive. And even in normal times, what does a higher R-square really mean to the business? And the R-square really isn't the goal in the grand scheme of things. It sort of is one of the steps to kind of get us there, but that's not what's really what the business is really interested in. That doesn't help them accomplish things. All this to say that the analytics has a much bigger objective than all this, but we often lose sight of it. So I think it's important for us to sometimes take a step back and see the bigger picture. So On the registration form, again, there was a place where you could submit questions in advance, and so I'm going to try to address them one or the other as much as I can. Now, interestingly enough, a good number of people left that blank. Now, usually for me, that means one of two things, mostly because I tend to talk about things that a lot of people are not familiar with. But usually means one of following two things. Number one, you don't know what to ask because this is all new to me. Or you are signing up really just to learn because I want to learn about new things. Either way, for this session, for both of these essentially translate to, well, what do you mean by enterprise processes for analytics and innovation? So I am going to start there, now that we've talked about the value and so forth. For this session, I'm going to warn everybody in advance. You'll probably hear me say, well, it's another topic for another day, or that's a separate discussion, etc. a lot. This is such a big topic, and you might have a lot of questions. And this will be an introductory overview of the concept. We won't have the time to get into the specifics, but what I hope is that this might help you reframe the problem towards more, let's say, lofty goals like analytical culture and effective cross-functional collaboration and things of that nature. So let's see if I can actually advance the slide. There we go. So addressing that question of what do I mean by enterprise process? Ideally, the way it's supposed to happen for us, I mean, when we do, those of us who do analytics and those of us who build models and do analysis and do studies and so forth, it's basically this. I'm presenting you a picture, and this is the only picture you're going to see, only slide you're going to see for the session, other than the introductory and closing slides. But as you can see, we have a wheel with 6 pie slices, right? And so starting with the start, kind of an obvious thing, the first step is to do some discovery, right? This is where you would typically look for ideas, get some initial insights or get some initial ideas, maybe test and validate some ideas at a very high level. Then you go into the design step. This is where you might do like requirements gathering or determine what is actually needed, design the solution, maybe plan some logistics, understand what other tools needed, data needed, etc. So a little bit more nitty-gritty into how this is going to get done. And up to this point, it's really about what solution to provide, right? Then you move on to the develop step. This is the part that we're most familiar with because that's really about developing a solution, applying your superior analytical, statistical, data science knowledge and skills and techniques to come up with like this shiny analytical object, right? Shiny solution, a beautiful model that can be used. Right, and then you move on to the deploy step, where you make the solution available or you make the results available, and up to this point. So the develop and deploy steps, the 3 and the 4. Hopefully this works. The 3 here and the 4 are really about how to provide the solution. So in the first 2 steps, we're concerned with what to provide, and in the 3rd and 4th steps, we're concerned with how to provide that solution, right? Then you move on to the next step, the inform and act. Someone takes the result, or someone takes what was made available and do something with it, right? That includes making decisions, changing situations, strategy, tactic, behavior, etc. Now, we say inform and act and do something, but the acting could be doing absolutely nothing, right? Based on decisions and based on the information you see, if it makes sense, if the best decision is to do nothing, then that is a valid action, right? I think we say we perhaps to put too much emphasis on act and expect people to do something different, that's not 100% of the universe of the possibilities. Right? It's perfectly valid if it makes sense. It's perfectly valid to do nothing, and that counts as acting. Then finally, you measure the results, right? You measure the impact. You identify what to improve, what else is needed, etc. You observe, and you go right back to the next iteration of the wheel, perhaps with the same problem, perhaps with, well, hopefully not with the same problem, but slightly more honed in problem or a slightly different problem, etc. And you start it all back up again. So the last two steps are really about what to do with a solution, as I mentioned. And this is where the business value is realized. It doesn't really matter how well you do the first 4 steps. If you don't get to 5 and 6, or if you get to 5 and hit a brick wall, there's no business value being realized. So this is an important consideration. Now, if you're familiar with the software development lifecycle, or SDLC, the first 4 steps are identical to that: discover, design, develop, and deploy. Now, unfortunately, I think from our perspective, we tend to see what we do as a linear process. So a client comes to us with a problem or a request or need for a model or what have you. We help solve that either by providing consultation, developing a model, writing a report, etc. So we deliver on the project and sort of ends there. And this is because we see a lot of what we do from a per project perspective, and this is challenging. A project always has a beginning and an end by definition. So there's a definite clear beginning and clear end. However, what happens between projects, between contacts, is actually a really, really important part in our ability to contribute towards business value. Now, this is an entire discussion on its own, so we'll save that for another day. But the project-based sort of mentality of this is where I start and this is where I end, this is what I deliver, why are they not, why is this not producing value? That has some huge challenges, because the last 2 steps are critical. The inform and act and observe and measure, they are critical. Again, this is where the business value is realized. But if we have a project-based mentality, those 2 steps stay outside of our mental scope. That is a big challenge for us. So that's kind of like the overview of the wheel, or the framework, the process framework. Now, there are 4 functions that participate in this throughout the process. So we got the analytics function, that's us, right? The data function, people who are really concerned about the data as a raw material, let's say. Business technology function, business function and technology function. And I mean business as a more of a generic term for the owner of the subject matter in the area of application. So the client, regardless of whether it is actually a business or not. It's just a convenient term. In most cases, and certainly within the same organization, each of these functions has a role in each step, although at varying levels of participation. So you can see these little balls, partially filled balls. They're, called Harvey balls if you're unfamiliar. Some are full, some are half, and it sort of indicates a level of participation you might have in that in that step. For example, it makes complete sense that the analyst function has full participation during the develop step, because that's what we do, right? The specifics of the participation now may be a little bit different for some cases, but the overall kind of a basic fundamental framework is pretty much constant regardless of what situation you're in. And the important point here is that this process framework is not a series of handoffs, meaning I do my part here, you go and do your next part. I'm finished with this step, you go do this next step. Not that, but rather a carefully designed series of collaborative steps. We'll get to the scope of this framework in a little bit. But anyways, now you might think, well, of course, sure, this is the way it's supposed to happen, right? The question I ask to that is, well, does your environment have a formal enterprise or environment-wide process for it? Is it accepted and understood by all parties involved? Now, I think we have an expectation it needs to happen, but more often it's not deliberately defined or communicated and perhaps not even agreed upon, right? We expect them to do this. We expect it to happen. We sort of explain it, but it's sort of one way, right? And it's not clearly, the expectations are not clearly defined. And so we're not providing anybody else with that expectation about how it's supposed to happen other than us talking about it until we're blue in the face. Now, Deming, got to bring in statisticians, right? So Deming said that we have to work on the system. Well, this is a system. If we want quality, we have to work on the system. The point is that this needs to be deliberately defined, documented, communicated, agreed to, rolled out, like any other repeatable enterprise processes. And without that, we're just going to continue to have a hard time setting expectations around how we want to collaborate with each other, with other parties, with other functions, etc. So what is the scope of this process? I said I'll mention this, so I'll do it now. By enterprise, now the word enterprise, we typically mean the entire organization. But you might say, well, I am an independent consultant, or my clients are external, etc. So, well, in some cases, and perhaps in a good number of cases, this can and will go across multiple organizations. Or if you are an independent analytics consultant, you are the analytics function and the other functions are somewhere else, right? They're outside of your quote unquote organization, especially if you're independent. It doesn't invalidate the framework, but it does make, it will require you to think a little bit harder in a sense that you really have to think beyond yourself or your organization as you develop your business strategies, how you're going to connect with those that are external to you, how you work with them, and more importantly, how you set expectations with others. And so the framework is still the same, that there might be essentially a quote unquote legal or contractual barriers between different functions. So that may add at a level of complexity, but at the end of the day, what needs to be done in this whole life cycle, let's say, is still the same. You just have slightly different considerations. So the bottom line is that it's the entire environment. So I've kind of already mentioned the word environment a little bit here, but environment, enterprise, kind of the same thing. Enterprise in the sense that it's within an organization, but environment is the whole thing, right? Wherever it's, regardless of organization, no barriers. It's the entire environment. So that's within the scope of this process framework. And this is because, and it's important, this is because the value of analytics, the business value of analytics, realize only when it goes the whole way around. You can't go 1, 2, 3, 4, and the value doesn't happen in between 1 and 4. It has to go to 5 and 6, and perhaps even go back to 1 before there is value, business value generated from analytics. This is a critical point. This also means that if our objective is to generate value from the enterprise or for the enterprise or the environment, we have to expand our reach a lot farther than what we typically learned in school or maybe even bargained for. How to do that is a whole nother set of topics. Won't go there today, not enough time. But anyways, hopefully that will start to kind of set the scenario or set the backdrop for some of these things that we're wondering, like value and process and so forth. So what are some of the key challenges or common disconnects that I see in the context of this process framework? Well, for one, often that the enterprise process itself doesn't exist. So we talk about it, we sort of see, understand it in concept, but as a process, as a system, it doesn't exist, right? So that's number one barrier. But anyways, now looking at it from the perspective of business value, there are two key disconnects. The first is getting from the deploy, so basically develop and deploy, providing the solution, to inform and act. So going from here to here, right? As I mentioned earlier, that's where the business value is realized. So there's a big disconnect from getting here to here, and there are any number of reasons. Again, a lot of really valid reasons why it's not getting there or having a problem. How many times do we develop models and then you sort of make it available and it sits on the shelf, right? I mean, this has been something that's been going on since the dawn of time. So how do we make sure that this actually goes from develop, deploy, and it actually gets used and it's actually is measurable, right? Use is one thing, you want it to be measurable as well. The second is getting from, and again, this is still from the perspective of business value. The second challenge or key disconnect is from getting from the discover and design, so the what to provide, and into kind of develop, right? So between what to provide and how to provide it. Now, what happens there as a result is that the objective of analysis often becomes misaligned from the value that actually matters to the business. So you get a value misalignment when you have a challenge between, in the earlier stages, discover and design, etc. You're going to have a misalignment of value expectation between what you produce in 3 and 4 in the develop and deploy and what the business wants from inform and act, etc. So that's just from the business value perspective. From the perspectives of the analytics professionals, there's often a confusion between design and discover. There's often a confusion between develop and design. And in the worst case, there's a confusion between develop and discover. So regardless of which perspective you come from, they both center around our tendency to consider analytics as something built around the analytical mechanics rather than around statistical thinking. Now, let's take a step back real quick. When was the last time you talked to someone on statistical thinking without mentioning anything statistics, data, analytics, etc.? And it's a really, really hard thing to do. We like to, when we talk about data, we like to talk about data, and we like to talk about statistics. We like to talk about analytics, but try to do that without mentioning, I have this list of prohibited words, the taboo words when I talk about some of these things. Try to have a conversation about the value of analytics and value of data without mentioning those words. Very, very difficult. And even those people on the business side would want to use some of those. So, but anyways, it's the I also keep in mind that statistical thinking is very different from data driven. I'm not going to go into that. Don't want to open up another can of worms. It's one of my sort of pet peeves. But anyways, so that's a really hard thing to do. So when the clients come to us, well, they're expecting us to jump from develop and to jump right into develop. And then with the data already collected or extracted, I just need a p-value, just need a model. I need the KS to be greater than 50 or whatever. This just happens because the client equates analytics with a set of procedures that consist of methods, techniques, and pure logic, the analytical mechanics rather than the whole of analytics. And then we as a profession often make things much worse by saying things like, well, give me all the data and I'll tell you what you need to know, or let the data speak. Recently wrote a blog on this, but that's problematic because it takes the business out of the process. And most people have problems with rationality. That's an entirely separate discussion, but rational things are scary to many people. This goes kind of contrary to what we as analytics professionals believe, but people are not rational. In fact, we are not rational. We just think we are. Anyways, the it's these sessions go just so quickly. We are already coming up, actually we have surpassed the 30-minute mark. And so I'll look to respond to the remaining questions in future sessions. Probably would be a good idea to continue in the next on the next Monday session. Please, let me see if I can. So please do send me any follow-up questions. Hopefully this has stirred up some thoughts and ideas and questions around all this. I know this is all kind of really conceptual and nebulous, but at least hopefully it would help you frame some of these questions, some of these thoughts. Also, send me your thoughts regarding any non-technical topics that you thought you think you would like to see covered that I might be able to address. Give me a follow on LinkedIn, Twitter, all those things. Next session will be in a week, same time, same place, on a topic to be determined by tomorrow morning, although I think we're just going to continue with this. I'll send that out via LinkedIn, Twitter, my website, and a few email lists. And if you registered, you'll receive that from me directly. Thank you for your time. Have a great rest of the day. And I hope to see you back next week.